go ahead and start recording. Walal and Mig really appreciate that. Mig is one of the clan mothers from her district and one of the people who really pushed to bring clan mothers back, and is also on the board for Women of First Light and on the advisory committee for Abiji Walal Malutanej, and certainly has been a really important person over many, many years for bringing traditions back. And so really thankful that she's here. So I'm going to pass it over to Nancy to give a bit of an intro. And then after that, we'll dive into Cassandra and Jason sharing a presentation on work that they've been doing around land rematriation and land transition and land justice issues, particularly with BIPOC communities. So Nancy?
Wonderful. Thank you, Ish. Walal and Ish, Mig, for bringing us, into our hearts and our spirits and, grounding us in that. My name's Nancy Lee, and actually, I want to also call in Erica. I thought we could introduce our team that also works together with Cassandra and Ben on this. So, Erica, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi. Me and Deloise and Erica Gideon Marsha. Wapna'kikewi'skwaq Wiggy Listuish. Hi, my name's Erica Gideon Marsha. I'm from Listuish and Geskavia. I live in Listuish and I work as the Peace and Friendship Coordinator for Tatamagouche Centre. That's it.
And I'm speaking for our team because Erica likes to be the behind the scenes organizer in Spitfire. But as Ish said, we worked really closely, Women of First Light and Tatamagouche Centre. My name's Nancy Lee, and I'm of Syrian Chinese ancestry and song lines, poet and facilitator. And I used to work at Tatamagouche. I left recently, but I'm honored to be in a role as supporter and coach these days. And I'm going to give us just a little bit of background and context for the webinar on behalf of our team, and backed, of course, by the Peace and Friendship Committee, of which Mig Mahan is part, Women of First Light, and the board of directors, many of whom are here, and Lee Fleming, acting ED, who sends her regrets. So we're all, we are all in a deep reckoning right now, and healing place with our own ancestors and traditions around violence and stolen lands and genocide. But I also believe with all of my spirit that we are in a deep, deep global shift and opening. And Mig Mahan just grounded us in that, a more nourishing and life-giving path. We don't know, but I have a hunch that the clan mothers are at the center of it. So, Tatamagouche and the United Church of Canada are at a historical and sacred moment right now. This builds on UCC's bold early days, many here today, as one of the first faith institutions to apologize to Indigenous peoples for both colonization and residential schools. So that reconciliation and healing work has continued through Indigenous ministries. Again, I think we have people here tonight, and at Tata Centre through justice and solidarity work. We have many hearts and neighbors in the room. So discussions about rematriation of the land started many years ago, but commitments solidified a little more recently, or I should say continued more recently, out of a program gathering in 2021 with a number of people, some of whom are also in the room tonight, who acknowledge that our healing and right relations are tied to healing the land. And that led to a formal commitment from the board of directors at Tatamagouche Centre and followed by the United Church of Canada. And Reverend Faith March-McCuich is with us here tonight. Hi, Faith. So that is a commitment to be in dialogue and in this process of rematriation of the land with Tatamagouche Centre and Women of First Light. As Ish said, a registered collective of clan mothers, grandmothers, and young Indigenous women from across Wapanaki. We don't know what the path looks like. We do know that rematriation honors that this particular piece of unceded land has always been Mi'kmaq and is a sacred, trusted gathering place for Ilnu and also for many communities, the United Church, Black and BIPOC communities, storytelling gamers, two-spirited queer folks, many, many communities. So we're walking the path together we have for decades, one of journey. It's been a long journey of love, peace, friendship, harm, and repair, solidarity. Now we're being called to our treaty responsibilities and calls to action to redress some of these legacies of genocide and colonization. And rematriation of Tatamagouche Centre lands is the next bold step in this beautiful journey. And we honor clan mother leadership in this process toward an Indigenous caretaking. Again, Mi'kmaq grounded us in one grounded in spirit and love that honors ancestors, future generations, all of us, all our relations, and the land itself. A new way of being together and really the world we deserve. So we recognize many of you have not been close to this process. So Erica is working again with support of Women of First Light and the center to raise awareness and support our many communities to come closer to what role you can play in support. So how did we get to know the Center for Ethical Land Transition and Cassandra and Ben, who I'll introduce? Tatamagouche Centre is part of a retreat center collaborative, a larger coalition of retreat centers. And one of their core programs is a racial healing initiative. And part of that was some land legacy work at which both Tatamagouche Centre and formerly Windhorse presented at in 2021 before their rematriation process. So it's through that coalition that we came to know Center for Ethical Land Transition. And so it's a pleasure to welcome and to introduce you to our guests, Cassandra Ferreira and Jason Patton from the Center for Ethical Land Transition. Cassandra Ferreira is the program director at Center for Ethical Land Transition. Through the work of Ethical Land Transitions, Cassandra's work to transform conventional real estate practice in service to land, cultural reunion, and reparative justice. Jason Patton is in charge of education and programs at the center. Jason works on relationships, reflection, synthesis, and action. He's the adult educator with a decade of experience in various educational settings, and his latest ventures include land and facility management. So they've had some experience working through land transitions in the States, and we're looking forward to learning from them. So Cassandra.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting us into this space and for the opening prayers and the building of friendship that's been happening over the last few months as we've been so honored to learn about your journey. And I truly pray that we can be of service today and potentially in the future to this land and to all of you. And I just really am grateful to this place and all of you, and really specifically the land for bringing us all together. It's so heartening to hear of the history and the long walk that you've already been on, and hopefully our presentation today can help catalyze next steps and have you know that there's support out here for you. And I will say that I am of mixed European descent. I have been residing in the unceded lands of the Pomo, Southern Pomo and Coast Miwok peoples in Northern California for the last 22 years and am deeply grateful to local elders that really have continued to help me become accountable to this place and the stories that are here and the stories that I'm part of. So just really in it with you all, and also really glad to share our experience today. I have been a real estate agent for the last 20 years, and not because I was confused about stolen land and systems built on stolen labor, but I was called into this work, and I'm so grateful that I now 20 years later am able to do the work through a nonprofit context, and having always just wanted to serve the land and justice, and it took a while, but it feels really good to be where we're at right now, and especially, as Nancy said, the land justice movement and the historic moment that we're in is just beautifully inspiring and a powerful time. At the Center for Ethical Land Transition, we offer land transition facilitation. We do educational support for title holders and those in reunion. We often work specifically with faith-based communities because it's you all that are really leading the way in many ways with this brave work. We serve Indigenous, Black, and communities of color in their journeys of reunion, rematriation. We really do our best to provide culturally affirmative support that's both technical and also deeply relational and land-centric. We work with teams of attorneys, other real estate agents, other facilitators, and when in California, we occasionally also provide agency with my license for on-market and off-market transitions. In the work that we've been doing, it is an incredible learning journey all the time. And every time, every land place, every relational situation, it's all unique and very, very situational. And so we continue to learn with every project we're involved with, and we track patterns. So as unique as they all are, of course, there's patterns that emerge through each transition. And in that, we we're continually reminding ourselves and learning to keep land at center and remember that the work is sacred and multi-generational, that it's going to take time to do this healing work. And as you might imagine, the work is also really challenging, and I would also say the most rewarding work that I could imagine doing. It feels sometimes like there's a well-worn highway that colonization and the capitalization of land has created. And there's lots of people moving down that highway in conventional real estate transactions that highly objectify the land and the people involved. And a lot of times people don't know any other way to do it. And so they just get on that highway. And more people are going off trail and returning, finding old trails, creating new ones, and in that off trail place of ethical land transitions where we're recentering Indigenous cosmologies and other cultural land-centric ways of being and regarding place, we need a compass. And so at least we do at the Center for Ethical Land Transition, we need a compass. And so today we're going to offer you our compass and also a bit of a reframe about how we see the people involved in a land transition. And then we'll also go on a journey of a couple of case studies and share with you the thresholds of land transitions that we've noticed in those case studies and what we can all learn from them. Jason, will you bring up the slide of our compass, please? We love the compass because it is it's used to orient. And as we're finding our way off trail, we need to orient and reorient. So in the north of our compass is our North Star, the eternal process of coming into right relationship with land. And that eternal process that no matter what our walks or our blended lines or how our path, that we can all orient actually to that path. What is our path of coming into right relationship with land? In a colonial context that we find ourselves in right now, in the East, what is rising with the sun, what is rising with the stars and moon and all that rises over the eastern horizon is a time of reunion, a time of rematriation, a time for Native, Black, and communities of color that have been disproportionately displaced and from land. Now is the rising time of reunion. So we place reunion with land in the East. I'm going to go to the other side of the compass. And in the West, what is setting is the fictional systems of title holding that we have right now. The fictional systems of private property, the kinds of systems that have actually separated us from each other and from land. And also literally people who are title holders who found themselves at the shores of late stage capitalism with an excess of control of land, of wealth, something that isn't actually their right relationship with land. And in discovering that, go into a process of relinquishment. And that process of relinquishment is not a process of stepping away and just backing off the way a seller in a real estate transaction would do. There's a stewardship process through transition that the folks who sit in the West of our compass, that their journey themselves is healing in coming into right relationship with land. In the South is the work of we hold the work of the facilitator, the seat of the circle, that the agents, that the attorneys, that folks like Nancy, that folks like that potentially even you could see Ish and Erica and the people who are here saying, hey, we need to facilitate or be facilitated. And that we need support. Those of us like real estate agents like myself who are creating new forms of practice, or attorneys, practitioners that are working to work with their clients to listen our way forward into new systems. So at the Center for Ethical Land Transition, we also really seek to support the facilitators in addition to provide that facilitation. And of course, in the center of the compass is the sacred fire of creation, the stories, the learnings that all bring us together to feel the warmth of the healing fire that keeps us focused and keeps us centered on the work of this transition. Next slide, please. This is another way of talking about the compass, but it's another reframe for the people who are involved in and the land itself that is involved in a land transition. So there's the title holders, the title seekers, the land itself, and land transition facilitators. And of course, in that north place, that other entity that's present, the future beyond, that we are all responsible and accountable to stewarding towards. And of course, there's a lot of other people involved in land transitions. There are attorneys and inspectors and sometimes surveyors and accountants and tax people. There's a whole host of support. But you can see through our language that we're really seeking to create another way of talking about this that actually continues to honor the relationships and the land. Jason?
So my name is Jason. I am with the Center for Ethical Land Transition, and I'm our educational director, and also work on a number of other things. I'm also of mixed European ancestry, and it continues to be a profound life occurrence for me that I get to be doing this incredible work. A big part of what brought me into this work and with Cassandra was that I have the opportunity as someone who works on education to really try to listen to the stories of different rematriation examples and ethical land transitions and try to turn those things into resources to help begin and create more momentum in the movement. And so today we're going to share a couple of specific case studies, and these are case studies that come directly from the Center for Ethical Land Transitions work that's been done in the field. The first one is between a Christian church organization that we're going to call the CCO and a group called Shelterwood. And we tell this story to bring out some of the underlying characteristics of land transitions, and especially to exemplify that in land transitions, there are many different threshold moments. Supporting rematriation in a good way isn't about a single moment of decision, but it's about a sequence of decisions that are made throughout a process. And the two entities, again, the CCO, Christian Church Organization, is a Protestant Christian denomination based in the United States. They have approximately 4,600 churches and around 700,000 members. And the Shelterwood Collective is an Indigenous, Black, and queer-led community collective of land protectors and cultural change makers. And they purchased 900 acres from the Christian Church Organization in Sonoma County, California. Now you'll see on the left-hand side of the screen, we have a list of things that are some of the things we describe as threshold moments. And we're going to walk through this case study, and we're going to talk about different things that happened in relating to each of these moments. The first one being the title holder assessment of values. So the Christian Church Organization had already adopted a racial justice resolution, stating that the case for reparations is of national and global movement for people of African descent, enslaved Africans, and their descendants globally. Descendants of indigenous peoples, including Native Americans, Latin Americans, Asian and Pacific Islander, Hawaiians, whose legacies include genocide, theft of land, the denial of legal and human rights, and forced labor to build the wealth of Europe and the US territories. So this is pretty strong language that this church organization stated in terms of their stance about reparations and about racial justice. And it's also true that this organization on their website states that they want to move beyond performative anti-racism. And in order to do that, it requires introspection and internal transformation, individually and institutionally. And this church has also hosted webinars about the land back movement. Now, we highlight these things because it's important to bring up some examples of the intentions that are behind people's actions when they're trying to do justice-oriented work. And for better or for worse, in this case study, we're examining how the intentions of this organization did not really line up with their actions. And so when they chose an approach to this process, they decided that they wanted to sell the property conventionally. They own a lot of different properties. They have almost $400 million in assets in 2018. They listed this 900-acre property on the camp with an asking price, AKA a ransom of $3.5 million. And of course, conventional real estate prioritizes the highest bidder. Now, the word ransom is a word that a number of people use in talking about the history of colonial land theft and the asking for a specific price when land goes back to people who originally tended land, or to people who were stolen people on stolen land, such as in the case of people who experienced enslavement. And so this word ransom is a strong word. It's strong for a reason, because we want to bring up that notion and try to hold consciousness around this legacy. And now this organization chose a team to represent the sellers. And when they chose their team, they only chose 2 people to represent the entire Christian church organization. And according to others who were involved in this process and interacted with them, these 2 people did not appear to embody the values of racial healing. And second to that, they didn't seem to have much familiarity with the camp that was for sale, which is a surprising thing. And I want to hand over actually to Cassandra again now, because somewhere around this moment in the process is when she entered into this group and started providing some facilitation.
I was honored to be introduced to the Shelterwood team, and my real estate partner, Erica Jennings, and myself, after several months of building trust with Shelterwood, in which they shared with us that they would have preferred to have worked with a real estate team that were folks of color that could understand their experience more. They weren't able to find those people who had the experience base working with complex rural property. And so they turned to us, and through a relationship, a shared relationship with attorneys at the Sustainable Economies Law Center who also served this transition. So the Shelterwood team, we took a few months to build trust together, and we decided to work together in a way in which we would bill for fee for service, and meant that we would not work for commission, and which is another interesting element of this story. And I like to humorously call it the largest commission I didn't receive, because I had the really beautiful opportunity to show up in just a reciprocal exchange and serve their process, and at the end redistribute that commission towards them, as well as have been fairly paid for my services to the project. So we have been working with Shelterwood on an off-market sale when we realized that we needed to pivot and actually look for what was listed, because it wasn't coming together with the family they were working with in the off-market sale. And we discovered quickly that this camp was coming up and it was listed for $3.5 million. And it was a really intense experience of moving quickly. So I'll go back into the story now where Jason left off. Because the two people that had been elected administratively, essentially to kind of dispose of the property, they didn't have any understanding of what was actually happening there. They didn't know anything about the water. They didn't know anything about the forest. They didn't make an effort to actually gather that information in a very responsible way and disclose that. Of course, there were caretakers. There were people who knew all of that information, but they weren't asked to be involved. And we had 3 weeks to create our inspection, to do all of our inspections of a very complex camp. And during those inspections, we actually unexpectedly met one of the caretakers who shared so much information that was very, very vital to Shelterwood to learn about the place. And unfortunately, when the CCO learned that we'd met that caretaker, they forbade that caretaker to speak with us, which really illustrated the depth of the transactional nature of this without regard to relationships, true stewardship and care for the land, and deep care for the future of the land. I do believe these two people were quite in a bind and subject to pressures that they themselves were certainly not enjoying being the center of. To the next slide. Apparently there was some financial scarcity. However, the property was bid up, and in order, luckily Shelterwood was very well funded, and we entered escrow $500,000 over the asking price. And yet the CCO still was not willing to pay for an appraisal, an inspection. Shelterwood, with all of their grant funding, paid for $30,000 worth of inspections in the due diligence period. In transitions, of course, whether they're transitions, transactions, whatnot, you need to go through this process of inspecting and finding out what you're actually coming into contact and responsibility for. And our inspections revealed some dangerous conditions, leaks with mold in the commercial kitchen, propane leaks, caved-in septic systems, massive problems with the pool. And unfortunately, the CCO refused to fix anything during the escrow, and we were only able to negotiate 58,000 credit, which was of course a fraction of the cost of what the neglected infrastructure actually required the care of. And so it was, as you can tell, the choices throughout this process were very difficult for Shelterwood to take. And yet they persevered because this place was going to give them such an incredible opportunity to do their work in the world. In real estate process, the land transition process, it's very important to disclose, to share. You know, there's the legal aspects of disclosure, which protect people, which is important. And there's just the moral or ethical aspects of sharing everything that you know, so that the history and the story can be as complete as possible. Of course, that wasn't possible in this situation. It was even so egregious that they had misrepresented the condition of the forest, of this 900-acre forest, and how recently it actually had been logged. When we actually just found those files in the office, it was in many ways quite a negligence of disclosure that we encountered in this process in this very short time frame. In the time frame for completing the process, we had only 3 weeks, and here what we're sharing is that when we went to try to negotiate anything with them, they basically threatened that they would pull out, that any negotiations or asks on our part would cause the end of the contract, that they would find their way out if we gave them a way out. And it was just, you know, like we stayed here, it was quite the flex, the power flex, given we were in escrow with them a full $500,000 over their asking price, and their inability and unwillingness to take accountability for the state of the property. So a part of land transitions is the narrative, the story that we're telling ourselves, and in really beautiful land transitions, like I know you all are efforting towards, the narrative can become a shared narrative, one that brings everybody together. Unfortunately, in this situation, the narratives were very different between the CCO and Shelterwood. They were not inside of a shared understanding of what was happening. According to the CCO, they participated in land justice. And that the transition could have been used as an example of racial justice and healing. And as Jason mentioned at the beginning of this, an embodiment of their values. But of course, that wasn't the case for Shelterwood. That was not a shared narrative. And to summarize for them, from Shelterwood's perspective, the CCO knew almost nothing about the facility, didn't meaningfully get to know the land for sale, didn't openly share information or help Shelterwood learn from the caretakers, were actually deceptive about the condition of the land, did not support the cost of inspections, did not meaningfully offer price credits that matched the dangerous and damages that we found. They likely only sold to Shelterwood because we actually were the highest bidder, and threatened continuously to pull out of the deal, if they were given the opportunity when we asked for repairs and compensation for the findings of this inspection. So Lael Camargo, one of the founders of Shelterwood, said that they got the best of both worlds. They got the most money and they had BIPOC buyers. Another part, of course, of land transitions is often the hope for a future relationship. And that relies on being in good relationship. Now, the CCO, having not acknowledged the harm that they caused in all of that I just described, they did not acknowledge that harm and yet still requested access to the camp. They even asked Shelterwood to speak at one of their public events with the congregation, kind of a feel-good moment for them. But they said to Shelterwood, but you can't actually talk about how much you actually paid for this. So, of course, this is not boding well for the development of trust, as if everything that I already mentioned, had served that. So Shelterwood declined in participating in events that were in which the agenda was held by the CCO. However, they did, even with all of those harms present, host an event because they wanted those that had a meaningful relationship, all the kids who had come to that camp, the people who had longstanding historic relationships with that camp, to be able to visit and share their connection to the land. And so Shelterwood, I felt, was very generous in being in wanting to nurture some of those who maybe they weren't at the effect of the CCO. I mean, they were actually at the effect of the CCO's decisions, but they weren't decision makers. And so Shelterwood wanted to hold the space open for their relationship with the camp. So that's a big story. And that's why we have a slide that gives us all a chance to pause and take a breath.
Thank you, Cassandra. I noticed that every time I hear that story, when we're using that story for a presentation, the impact of it doesn't really diminish. I think also because I know some of the individuals personally who are part of Shelterwood, the stress that they endured was really a lot. And we actually really want to give a little bit of time right now to invite people to reflect on what comes up for you listening to this case study. Yeah, so take a moment and again, just think about that. What comes up for you? And after a moment of thinking, we're gonna invite people with raised hands in our Zoom room, and we're gonna call on people if you want to briefly share out any responses that you have.
Anyone? They had to. It was too quiet.
It's true. It's typically a break the ice moment for sure to begin with. And if you're not sure where the raise hand function is on your Zoom, you can just put your hand up, and one of us will be able to see that you're there.
Sandra's got her hand up.
I'm curious, you said, Cassandra, there were two people that were negotiating, so to speak, on behalf of the church. Did Shelterwood ever have an opportunity to actually connect with the church people? Was it always just a relationship between two people who were facilitating a good deal on behalf of the church?
Mm-hmm. At the beginning, they really had hoped that because we did have, before we got into contract, we had a Zoom room time together where Shelterwood got a chance to not just be the highest bidder contract, but actually share a bit about who they are and the vision that they have for the property and their whole vision of healing. And so we had hopes that there would be more relationship. And so it was really only that the caretaker who showed up on that day, who'd been helping to take care of the camp and part of in a way, part of the church, that they're still in relationship because he's local to that place. And then through the event that they hosted, where they invited all of the folks who were local to the area and had a relationship with the camp through the church to come. And I went to that event and I got to meet some of the church folks as well. So it was minimal, but it was it was very strained by the real estate process, and what had transpired in that. It definitely went differently than Shelterwood had hoped. You know, they had ideas like, oh, if we really all collaborate here, maybe, you know, because the CCO had ideas about decolonizing the camp experience. And Shelterwood was like, oh, we have great ideas about that. Like they could have done something very powerful together. But unfortunately, time and money and the way the structure, the intent structure of that process, really inhibited that. Yeah, and
Yeah,
you
and
know,
just
oh, sorry. Were you gonna say something about Shelterwood?
yes.
Go ahead.
Just to mention that Shelterwood has been very successful, you know, since they were able to acquire that property, and they are setting a really fabulous example of unique forms of self-governance and shared decision-making structures. And we were able to visit Shelterwood in the fall of last year and really learn about their progress and their process. And so they're definitely, you know, a success story and a fabulous example also of a collective that's really doing a lot for the Back to Land movement and is inspiring a lot of other people.
Rena?
Hi, thanks for this. So my name's Rena. I'm connected with the center and have been part of some of the conversations, and the case study that you just shared, for me, I mean, it breaks my heart and makes me angry, but makes me feel just honored and proud, I guess, to be connected with the process that's happening at the Tatamagouche Centre and the relationships that exist. It feels, and what I understand about how things are moving forward, that to me, it's embodying, or it feels like right relationship, like the being in relationship, in care together and with the land, and certainly imperfect because we are human. But yeah, that's a lot of what's coming up. It's just like a lot of gratitude for the investment of relationships and the trust building even after harm. Yeah, it's heartening for me. So thank you. Yeah, thanks to everyone who's been part of that.
And I think right now we might move right along because we would love to get to presenting the more positive example, which we're also very grateful to get to share. And so before we do that, though, I'm going to jump back into screen sharing, and Cassandra's going to summarize just briefly some of the common issues that are experienced in land transitions.
So this whole thing of entitlement, you know, title holders often, I have been a title holder. there's a unexamined entitlement often that happens. And one of my partners, Xavier Freedom, said that it's moving at the speed of whiteness, which unfortunately too many people laugh at knowingly, like, oh yeah, I know that, which is at the time frame set by the title holders. And often that is a hurry up right now, wait for a long time. Okay, now. And so it can be very like the pace of moving at the speed of whiteness is actually not just one thing. It's generally just at the what works for us speed. The cultural entitlement inside of that is when white folks are not recognizing that they're behaving as if their worldview is the worldview. Oh, this is the real estate process. This is how it goes. This is what you need to do right now. And not recognizing that that's a way of being that's actually producing, unfortunately, more harm in the world. Often, of course, that entitlement is belief in the title system, which of course we know is rooted in land theft and genocide, broken treaties. The actual title insurance that's insured by title companies is in some ways there's it's a tragic comedy because it's not actually, there's an illegitimacy to it, but yet there's people who really believe in it. And very painful situation that occurs all too frequently is then when title holders decide they want to be part of a process with local Native communities, sometimes there's an expectation that those folks are going to show up doing the beautiful, prayerful, indigenous things that make them feel good and make them feel like they're part of a good process. And that is often not authentic or the right cultural or sacred moment to do those things, and that can feel like performance of indigeneity. And so there is a continual expectation, and we, even if it's not a known expectation, but it's almost like an embodied expectation that Indigenous, Black, and other folks of color will do the education work to kind of bring to up level everybody in the relational field, and that's just not that's not right for us to expect. It's important that those of us with unexamined entitlement are doing that work ourselves with each other. And whenever I've had the opportunity to genuinely reflect that to usually faith-based communities, they're so grateful. Then they can see it, and then they get back into relationship with their values. And unfortunately, we also see ingenuine offers or lack of clarity in offers that are made and then oh, actually not that, and then the mind is changed. Oh, not that time frame. Oh, actually we need this. Oh, and of course you could imagine the how similar that is to the cultural wound of broken treaties. So we never want to see that in ethical land transitions. And we certainly don't want to see as much inflexibility as we saw in the CCO example. But unfortunately, there's a common inflexibility that comes because title holders reach a place often of scarcity of their own survival, their own financial situation, and that puts time scarcity, the money scarcity, and can create a rigidity. So as much as possible, it's best to approach these things like it sounds like you all are, with enough of a ramp that the relationships can build and have more of a suppleness that can move through the transition together.
Yeah, thank you, Cass. And something that's important to remember is that we, those of us who are working on undoing these dominant cultures, those of us who are working on decolonizing our minds and our experiences, doing these things really requires support and care of ourselves and each other in community. And so even though it's true that with the first case study and with this kind of brief summary of some common issues, this really isn't about trying to point a finger of blame or harm, but still acknowledging that harm can happen and that people's actions, even if they don't intend for them to be harmful, can still create very real harm. And with all that said, we're aware that our work will always have different examples of things that do and don't work as well. And our second case study is about a more optimistic story that we got to participate in. So in this story, we have two parties again. Kate, who is an individual who has spent 25 years living on and stewarding a parcel of land and caring for its natural ecosystems, and an intertribal collective, which is a local group of multiple tribes who bring together their advocacy for land and water in a region known as in a region known for land and water theft by public utility companies. And so part of the history of this land and the theft of this water and land was among the impetus that inspired Kate to participate in a type of land back. And so as a descendant of white colonial settlers, Kate knew that it was her role to face the legacy of harm by working on reparative actions. And as she made that decision and knew that was her ethical alignment, she decided to participate in land back. And towards the beginning of the process, she assembled a council of advisors to support her and partner with her through the process. And, relationship building is such a key, essential piece of all of this, because so many people wonder how to participate in land back and don't know how to begin relationship building. And I know, fortunately, the Tatamagouche Centre already has done so much relationship building. In this case, Kate already had a deep relationship with the land from her 25 years stewarding the land. And she already had a number of years becoming increasingly connected to the local issues facing the tribes and the historical water theft of the region. And so when she went to transition the land, she already knew about this intertribal collective who were defending the right of Indigenous water access and cultural preservation. And now, something that is very key and significant for this transition was starting out early on, there was trying to identify the needs of each party. And Kate realized that she needed some type of compensation to support her through her old age, but she was by no means attempting to get a market value for this land. And the intertribal collective would need help with their fundraising. And they also desired support from someone familiar with the process of non-conventional land transitions. And this is when Cassandra entered into this story, when they began to form their more official transition team. So I want to hand off back to Cassandra to talk about that.
So this was, of course, a beautiful situation in which the land, the title holder, and the folks coming into reunion with the land were all already in relationship. The Intertribal Collective had an attorney working for them, a tribal attorney working on their behalf for years, but needed help with the actual relationship tending between everyone and navigating with the title holder and getting into contract. And so I was invited to work with everyone, including the attorney, and together we drafted the transition agreement and other agreements that were necessary for the land transition. I also facilitated meetings for everyone, when everybody came together is when they needed me. And we'll move on to the next threshold of providing information about the property. This was done a little bit less formally, but deeply in relationship. There were already stewards who were going to be part of a transitional stewardship plan, and Kate and the steward shared everything that was known. everybody participated to make sure that a full body of information was transitioned, because over the 25 years that Kate and her partner stewarded this land, there was a lot that had been developed there that needed care. And there were no formal inspections in this. The infrastructure was well cared for. The Intertribal Collective did not request any. However, being responsible for having a good leave and wanting to hand over something that was well, Kate had been involved. There had been a moisture intrusion during this process, and she paid for and completed the mold abatement, and that was done before the transition was completed, and Kate took care of that. In the next threshold, the disclosures. Everyone was kind of, interestingly, because there was such a strong emphasis on relationship, there wasn't as much of an emphasis on all of the in California, there's a lot of legal paperwork that can go along with real estate transactions. But what was done was more oral transmission, walking together, spending time in the land together, writing things down together, making videos together. It was done in a highly relational context. In this, everybody stayed in the process through the completion. There were multiple meetings between the whole circle, although Kate was less and less involved in many of the meetings, but yet she stayed very involved in the fundraising, which was a beautiful thing to see. She said, I need some part of this to help me through my old age. However, I'm willing to bring all of my contacts, all of my love and care for this property to help fundraise for the Intertribal Collective, not only for the reacquisition price, but for beyond that. And so there was this beautiful involvement and sense of solidarity throughout the entire process, which included scheduled councils and reflection points and ceremonies that acknowledge different phases and milestones, including a transfer and completion ceremony. They were able to be in the shared public narrative. So instead of that in that Shelterwood example where you've got these different stories about what happened, this was a shared story. Now, of course, I'm sure there were some hardships that it was hard for each of these folks coming together along the way. It wasn't just rainbows and flowers. There were edges, but they were able to stay in communication and in relationship and have a shared narrative that they participated in to create a fundraising video together and show up publicly together in that shared story. There was minor, public, like, quote, opposition or skeptics or naysayers. There was minor. In other situations we've been involved in, there's been more. And it's really important when everybody can be together in that shared narrative. So if there's naysayers, they together address that with in solidarity. Now, you can imagine in this situation, the establishment of a future relationship was actually a natural part of the process because they're in relationship. It was talked about how much, certainly Kate and her partner were to no longer have a residence there, but when and how they were welcome to come back was something that happened in relationship. She had plenty of time, even after escrow, to clear out her personal items and have her final transition councils with the land and her advisors. And it was easy for the Intertribal Collective to agree to this because it was all upfront, it was all communicated, and they were able to get through it together in a way that sustains ongoing relationship. Oh, there's another little piece here about ongoing relationships. I guess I've already said it, based on friendship and mutual respect, and in which Kate retained no special rights but only ones that were agreeable, were mutually agreeable. All right.
Thank you, Cassandra. Ah, this is another good time to take a deep breath. Yeah, so this pretty clearly is a story with a whole different tone to it, because primarily the relationality of the different parties involved and what it's like to engage in relationship with other people, and even the land that was in the middle of this, engaging with the land as an entity as well. And something to just touch in on in summary of this is a short list of components of more supportive land transitions. And this is something that a number of these pieces appeared in the second story that we shared. And so in more supportive land transitions, each party creates guiding principles that your group is aligned with for the land transition. Each party chooses a transition team and clearly identifies their roles and responsibilities. And that second part of that one is very essential, because to choose people to represent a larger organization is one thing, but defining what power and what agency they have is enormous. Which is why the next part is to design how communication and decision making will happen between the transition team and the larger organizations. More supportive land transitions also include identifying facilitators and advisors who are necessary to support a values-aligned transition. And it also includes each group discerning their needs and their boundaries for the transition. And whereas in the first case study, there were a number of needs and boundaries that were not really spoken in an upfront way, that ended up coming out at times that were not just ungraceful, but were pretty hurtful because of the time limitations that were forced on Shelterwood. We really see that with more relationality and more reflection internally with each group, that discernment of needs and boundaries happens, and then it can be more clearly communicated to the other party. And finally, it's so vital that each party is developing their own internal systems of support, such as talking circles, such as conflict transformation meetings, which is bringing up the places of tension and working on how do we move through this tension? How do we address it in a direct way so that we can grow from it? And especially reflecting on the values alignment throughout the process, so that there are moments where everyone pauses and looks at everything that's happened so far, reflects on the decisions that have been made and the decisions still in the future, and continues to ask that question: are we creating actions with our values throughout this process? And now with our remaining time today, we do want to do a breakout room to invite people to be able to speak some of their own feelings about not just these case studies, but about the Tatamagouche land transition in general. And so the questions that we have are: what values do you think will support the Tatamagouche land transition happening in a good way? And what are the challenges and opportunities that you see about the process? And I am going to exit screen share. As soon as people are in their breakout rooms, then these questions are going to appear again in the chat. So you don't have to hold on to them. But still, while we're getting into breakout rooms, I think that it can be good to take a look at these questions and just reflect on them for a moment. So I'm going to leave this slide up for another 15 seconds.
We may actually put 3 people in a room just to give a bit more chance for folks to have time to talk. But I'm leaving that up to Nancy.
Yeah, I think so, because we're just a little over time. So maybe to get a little bit more time, we'll have 10 minutes and 3 people in a room, and that'll keep the same amount of time to share. And we'll repost the questions in the room.
Thank you, Nancy.
Great. Okay. Opening all of the rooms. We're wandering down the hall from the sanctuary. Entering.
I'll be there in 10 minutes. I just need to get coffee and go to the bathroom.
Right?
Bio
right.
breaks built in.
To meet someone in the
I'll
hallway
give you
first.
a good 10 to 12 minutes and let you know a minute beforehand. I'll broadcast that in the room. They're already walking down the hall.
Okay, so everyone join your room. All right, everybody's coming back in. Hope you had a good discussion.
Yeah, this is my my son, Terry.
Do we have everyone in now?
Not sure, but I think probably enough to get started.
Wonderful. So yeah, I hope that you did have a chance to discuss the questions that we posted. We are going to have some time for some sharing out of just some main points or things that people want to share them. But before, I'm going to invite people to type into the chat if there's something that you want to share just about what your conversation was like or any key points. Go ahead and type those into the chat so we can read them.
Okay, so we got a really good discussion written in there by Allie. Leanne's really concentrating on what she's going to say.
Oh, and I'm not muted, sorry. I was
That's
actually,
okay.
no, yeah, it's hard to sort of put some of these things down in the chat.
Do you want to share it verbally then, Deanne, and kick us off in the feedback from the small
Actually,
groups?
I would defer to Ardina.
Yeah, I'll jump in to say I'm unfortunately on my phone, so it's hard to type, so it'll be easier to just speak. But we're just talking about the idea that there are still only two parties in the conversation and in the in the conversation, and we're missing an integral third party, which is the land itself and the inherent rights of the land. And we were curious of how this gets worked into the relationship for everyone so that it's always for the land. And it's kind of pulls from the concept of free land and the inherent rights of land. And Deanne mentioned like personhood of the land, and if this could be incorporated into legal transactions or however it comes to be, and really shifting the consciousness of everyone involved into recognizing this third party and putting it at an equal or above level of everyone else, and whoever is the land holder at the end of the day in Indigenous or BIPOC communities, they're stewards of the land, and the land has its own rights. I'll leave it there. You could go on.
I love that.
Yeah.
Thank you, Adina. I think that's an enormous thing that, it's interesting. Just that concept is such a transcendent concept. It's all around us, but it seems as though people really need to relearn that connection. So I am really grateful for you bringing that into this. And just to read off some of the other things people said, Sally mentioned that there was a balance between relationships and clarity on each party's part. And Pix mentioned very positive, we can find a good way forward. And Rena wrote down values of love, trust, things take time, honoring grief as part of the path. that honoring grief piece, absolutely. And a bunch of other great stuff in the chat. I could keep reading, but I also would love to see if there's anyone else with either a hand raised using the Zoom feature or just putting your hand up. If there's anyone else that wants to share in our space about some of the conversations you had. Catherine mentioned that they really like the idea of a transition team. Sandra said that it was great to hear from 2 women from Maine who are doing this work there, and agreed that the presentation was wonderful. That Tatamagouche Centre is taking a bold step that will increase public awareness of colonialism and land back. Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that's around part of what the clan mothers said, because when we first started having these discussions and people were like, well, we don't want to use the term land back because the land has always been Mi'kmaq and it's always been a sacred area. And so rematriation felt more comfortable. And we also, you know, I remember Mig saying clearly, we don't want to own the land in the way that title holders own it, because that's not our way, right? And so that's where we started talking about land trusts and thinking about even in the land trust, making sure that the values are there so that the generations ahead can understand what the intention was. And it's also been the work that we've been doing that started last August on healing the actual land, because we know a lot of trauma has happened on this land. And so there's been, since August, ceremonies happening on the land to work on actually respecting that land and healing the land and understanding that, you know, the land isn't inanimate and it needs healing just like we need healing, and, you know, all those sorts of things. So yeah, that really resonates with me. And Dick has just raised his hand.
Yeah, a question for Cassandra and or Jason. If you are approached by someone who owns property and they want to somehow participate in rematriation or land back or whatever, I'm wondering how you if someone approached you and had no idea of who to give this land to, how do you, or do you try to make a connection with you know, with a group? I'm just thinking here in Mi'kma'ki. Mi'kma'ki is a huge area. You know, it's around 30 Mi'kmaq First Nations communities recommended or recognized by the government of Canada, but that's only about half of the Mi'kmaq people who live here in this area, and who, you know, if I had 100 acres of land where I live in the middle of Mi'kma'ki, who would I give it to? Is my, or how would I find out, you know? Does that make sense?
It sure does.
Obviously, Tatamagouche Centre has a connection with the Women of the First Light, and that's wonderful, and that's probably been years in the making. I don't know, but you know, I have a friend, for example, who has 100 acres of land, and he doesn't have any family, and he wants to give the land to somebody, like some of the environmental groups or somebody, and I suggested giving it back to the Mi'kmaq people, but I don't know how, you know, what to tell them, who to talk to.
Yeah.
And which of the, are you going to go with one of the 30 First Nation communities that are recognized by the government of Canada, or somebody else? You know, I don't know the Grand Council of the Mi'kmaq people. You know, if you could give it to them, or who would you give it to?
I know you're asking me and Jason that question, and I will say something, but I actually feel like I'd be curious if there are other folks who want to weigh in on this, because the when you need to or want to let go of a parcel of land in the sort of the current conventions and legal system, there's, like I said, a very well-worn highway. You can, find a listing agent, sell it, you can find an estate attorney and bequeath it. You can, there's things that are well-worn paths. My experience is that this question, and it comes up certainly quite a bit in our work, and it's not there's often not a clear answer, because the effects of colonization, as we know, have left a lot of tribes scrambling over disparate and not enough resources, and sometimes not always aligned with each other, and that is, and unfortunately, sometimes we've seen people take actions that actually exacerbate local intertribal relationships. And so it's not something to move quickly with. It's something that at least I would really love to hear, others, elders, and if possible, I'm trying to see if she's still here, but anyways, I'm looking for the person who did our opening, or Ish, if you wanted to speak to this, like, what are the lines of questions and finding of relationships and asking of elders and discovery, for somebody in Dick's friend's situation that might help, support a land transition like that. And again, our elders also share with us that sometimes there's going to need to not just be the land, there's going to need to be support for the potential creation of some kind of title holding entity, and that takes time, and that takes financial support, and that takes a very culturally aware way of being in relationship. So I guess I'd be curious, Ish, how you would respond to that.
Sure. And I've noticed Megan looked like she's had to leave the room. So
Yeah.
I'll jump in just from the discussions that we've had at Women of First Light, and discussions that happened even before Women of First Light formed. And there was always very deep concern about the Tatamagouche Centre going to a band council, or going to one of the band council communities, because of how they operate within the government system. And we've seen some actions which community members actually don't really buy into. And so how do you, and it's hard if you don't have a relationship, how do you find out about those sorts of things and build from those places? I think one place to start might be Wapna'kikewi'skwaq, which is a Mi'kmaq foundation that ended up taking over Windhorse Farm, and they may have other connections to other groups. And it is difficult because the group, to be able to take the land, does need to be formed into some type of organization. We were lucky in that we do have a charitable number, so it's easier to handle that way. But it could be a bit of a transition there. And yet there are people. So for example, in this area, there's 2 Mi'kmaq people who are working on trying to start farms and are looking to build up those sorts of things and bringing things back. So there is people in different areas, grassroots people in Shubenacadie working to try and create community gardens and those types of things. Yeah. And we are in communications with other Indigenous land trusts in Canada, and we're going to be having another webinar bringing them into it at our next webinar. One of them is in Toronto doing these similar things, another one that's out west in Alberta doing similar things. So Dick, I don't know if that really answered your question, but I think part of it can be you now know some of the people of Women of First Light. So it may not make sense to actually that Women of First Light to be in negotiation with it, but they may know somebody else that it could work with.
And Ish, thank you for everything you shared.
Thank you.
And I don't mean to interject right now, but I just want to be mindful of our time and make sure we have time for our final things. And I will
Okay.
just want to reflect though on Dick's question and also add in that this is a field of work that's just kind of being developed more so right now, which is what does it look like for organizations, entities, tribal groups, and BIPOC groups who are seeking land reunion, and what does it look like for title holders? And some of the work that the Center for Ethical Land Transition is doing right now is research and development for trying to provide support for people based on where they're at with their land transition. And so a lot of it is emergent, and I have the hope and belief that soon it will be a more common thing that there will be community leaders and community representatives in way more places who are talking about these things and who are aware of groups that are seeking land. And so I have the hope that that will continue to happen, and I believe that it will. Right now, I noticed that we're nearly at the end of our time. I want to see if I think, Nancy, I'll ask you, because I know that we wanted to have a moment to close on some next steps. Do you think it makes sense to transition to that right now? And so then we have time for our closing.
I think so. Hey, Ish, Erica, yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to share my screen one more time. So now today, our presentation involved being in conversation about a number of things with the case studies that we got to share. I'm grateful that everyone was able to attend and listen. And I hope that some beautiful things came out of the discussions that everyone had and the things that were shared all together. And I do want to hand over to Nancy to ask if you want to share more about some of the things that Women of First Light has planned coming up.
I think I'm going to give that to Migmahan and Ish.
Okay.
Okay, so we've been having discussions behind the scene with a couple of Indigenous folks in Toronto and in Calgary around doing a webinar on land trust. And we know that there's interest from other people in Fredericton that you know, have land leases with the city and are wondering if they can get it turned into a trust. So it'll be about sort of having some practical conversations around how does that look like and what does it work like, and then also building a support network so that we can continue to stay in touch with each other and support each other as we go through this. We've been working on establishing an advisory committee, which may be called a transition team, that basically the clan mothers are busy doing all the caring and the work that they do to help heal the communities. And so putting together a team of different folks that can help guide this process, and also, you know, folks who have experience in building maintenance and, you know, some of the practical stuff and about the land and architects and all those sorts of things. And we're also feeling like who within the United Church do we need to be working with? Yes, Ardina, in order to develop an agreement. We've been, you know, having some conversations around maybe we have some kind of pre-agreement or transitional agreement that we start working on. And we've been going through the different, you know, the properties committee and And the Tatamagouche Centre Board has created a rematriation committee. And we know that Faith is on in here and has been at general council meetings where it's been discussed. But we're just sort of feeling like, okay, we need clarity on around who within the United Church of Canada should all be at these discussions. And then looking at the amount of funding that's needed to prepare the center. We talked to one Indigenous foundation and they were saying you need to assess all the buildings. And we know there's massive amounts of repairs done. I live in a house the center owned. It flooded today. You know, so how do we do that? And do we need to do a large fundraising campaign so that we have the money to do the buildings? Or is there a way that Women of First Light would be able to access money that the center can't access in order to do some of those repairs? So that's some of the things that we've been working on. And then having regular conversations with Nancy and, you know, finding out technical stuff like what kind of lawyer would we need and yeah. And then we also wanted to offer to the United Church that there could be an additional webinar that could be specifically offered for the United Church if you want to go deeper into these learnings. We know that there has been talk about sort of, you know, and we know the people in Toronto, the Indigenous people were talking about, well, we want this land from the United Church. And so it's a Canada-wide thing. And maybe there's some protocols that could be offered or guiding principles that we could have somebody accompany the United Church. So we're offering that to the United Church and continuing to learn about rematriation and ethical land transition and continue for the church to clarify its needs in the transition. And we'd also say the Tatamagouche community as a whole in the transition as well. And we're certainly no one in Women of First Light. Women of First Light recognizes that the center is an important place for a lot of different communities and doesn't want to be, okay, that's it, you're excluded now. That's not the intention. The intention is that it will come under the care of the clan mothers and that it still will be a welcoming place for other communities, the Muslim community, the African Nova Scotian, you know, all these different communities that it's been a spiritual home to. And I know there's people on this call from the church who it's very much of a spiritual home. And so how do we honor all of that? Anything you want to add, Nancy?
Not on my side. I was wondering, Meg, did you have anything you want to?
Maybe
Just
come back. Oh, there she is.
yes, just something very brief. I want to share that something that we've been talking about for it's come up many times, but here's a real opportunity for people of the land to experience what could have been experienced in the great arrival on our shores. I don't think we've ever experienced coming into the longhouse and what that means, you know, and working out of indigenous laws, not law, but it's similar to that when we talk about our relationship to land and our relationship to each other. So I don't, there's not even many of us in our community, but it's in our language. And so when those discussions begin, I think that's really important for the grandmothers to come and share what that means and how that looks like in matricultural society, heart-centered woman, mother-centered way of being. So that's I'm very curious and it's exciting just to think about how you will be hosted in our ceremonial lodges. And how the land has responded to all of us. You know, it's how the language is the blueprint of our worldview, and we get a chance to do this together. So that's how I'm looking at it through that lens and the excitement of it, because I think it's the time. We didn't have words that would be out of so much respect for life, honoring life, respecting each other, and knowing that we don't need to agree, but respect is definitely an obligation for humanity to uphold our sacred responsibilities to each other and to how we care for the land. Thank you.
Thank you. Somebody just asked if we would have to pay taxes on the land where churches don't. It may be another policy battle, because why is Native spirituality not recognized the way that churches are and not having to pay taxes? So it may be another battle that we have to fight, another policy we have to change. But I would definitely argue that the center should not, because it is a spiritual center for the Mi'kmaq people. Anyways, that gets me riled up. Thank you. Tosh and I thought we would just close by offering a song. We're not going to drum because she just got her 8-year-old to sleep, and if we start drumming, he'll wake up. So we'll just sing for you.
Yeah.
Okay. Hey, honey, honey. Hey, honey, honey. Hey, honey, hina, hey, yo. Hey, honey, honey. Hey, honey, honey. Hey, honey, hina, hey, yo. Hey, honey, honey. Hey, honey, honey. Hey, honey, hina, hey, yo. Hey, honey, honey. Hey, honey, honey. Hey, honey, hina, hey, yo. Oh. So we thank Cassandra and Jason, and thank all of you for joining us in this circle. And to let you know, it's just kind of the first circle, and we'll have some other circles. And we'd love to hear back from the United Church folks if they're interested in us organizing another webinar specifically for them. And we will also Erica will be working on pulling together the Indigenous circle, where we hear from Indigenous folks across the land who've been involved in this work too. So thank you. Walalan.
Thank you, everyone. It was a privilege to be here.
Yes, thank you so much. Beautiful to be with you in this.
Gratitude for all
Awesome.
of you. Lots of
Walalio namutoksap.
Walali.